RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery. Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to the Cave for another Tech Nibble, and today it's all about this, the KCS Power PC board for the Amiga. Now this is a board that I remember seeing all the time in the back of magazines like Amiga Format, alongside competing products, and it seemed to promise so much. Shown here in July 1992's edition of Amiga Format for £188. Now what it promised in my head was a chance for my humble Amiga 500 to be on a par with the PCs of my PC-owning friends, to be able to use those exclusive PC games and their business software and, well, just claw back some bragging rights. And all of that supposedly at the fraction of a cost of an actual PC. Was it too good to be true? Well, today we're going to find out, and we're going to find out thanks to Leon, who's donated this to the Cave. Thank you, Leon, for sending that in. And it's worth noting before we get stuck in, the Power PC in the name of this board has nothing to do with IBM's Power PC range of processors. That's just pure coincidence. I think this was named even before that processor came to light. So forget all about that. This is all about PC compatibility using x86 chips, and you'll see exactly what's on the board shortly. Let's open the box, let's lay those myths to rest, and let's see if our Amiga 500 can actually be a compatible and useful PC.
So what have we got in our box? Well, quite a lot. It's actually straining under the weight of its own contents and could use some reinforcement. The majority of its contents are paperwork with Microsoft logos on, which will have turned the stomachs of hardened Amiga users, I know. And of course, there's the card itself. P25-42 written on the board indicates that this is a second revision board, and the size of it of course is dictated by the size of the trapdoor expansion bay in the A500. This particular board was marketed as the very first PC emulator for the A500 on release. The CPU is an NEC V30 running at 11 MHz. That's an Intel 8086 compatible CPU, and on a revision 1 board was clocked at 8 MHz, so we do get a little bit of a speed boost with our V2 board. The Amiga of course has a Motorola 68000 CPU. That's perfect for emulating an Apple Mac of the period which houses the same CPU, but to tackle a PC, an additional CPU is essential for any chance of a usable experience. The battery on the board here is also bulging a bit, so in the longer term I'll make a note to swap that out. And there's 1 MB of memory on board, which is important because it was very common to have a 512K memory expansion in the Amiga's trapdoor, and you don't want to lose that. So when you're operating in Amiga mode, this card gives you that 512K expansion, and the remainder of the memory on the card is available as a 512K RAM disk, which is quite useful. I say Amiga mode because unlike, say, this BBC Micro emulator for the Amiga, which runs in a window in Workbench while you multitask, the KCS card takes full control of your Amiga. You're either in PC mode or Amiga mode from the moment you boot up, but not both at the same time. On release in 1991, you'd have paid £189.95 for the board alone, or £219.95 with Microsoft MS-DOS version 4 included. And it was produced by Kolf Computer Supplies, a Dutch company who are still in business today, and here in the UK it was marketed by Bitcon Devices. Mine does indeed come bundled with MS-DOS, and I can tell you, it feels very strange indeed putting this into an Amiga. We might even be breaking some laws by doing it. Documentation for the board itself is very light, with the bulk of it made up of MS-DOS manuals, and they're no different to standard MS-DOS manuals with the exception of a big KCS PowerPC sticker slapped on the front of them. If you're going to get the most out of this, you will need to get a good understanding of DOS commands. I don't have a hard disk for my A500, so we'll be running from floppy disks today, but our board does support the more mainstream hard disks for the A500, and for an extra £75 you could buy an adapter to plug the board into the Zorro slot of an Amiga 1500, 2000 or 3000, so it does cover most of the Amiga range. There's still lots to learn, but let's get this installed while we do so. Installation is quite simple. We remove the 512K memory expansion, which is now redundant owing to the memory on the KCS board. It's quite nice doing it through the trapdoor because you don't void your warranty in doing so. And there it is, ready to go. We're sorry, little Amiga, for what we're about to put you through. On powering the Amiga on, there's no discernible difference. The Amiga acts as normal with that iconic kickstart image on the screen. Today we're using a Gotek floppy drive emulator for testing because sadly the bundled floppies are no longer readable, but we'll get to enjoy the same experience regardless. In the Amiga's native workbench we can see 1 meg of memory minus the operating system's overhead, so our additional RAM on the KCS board is functional. Inserting the KCS floppy disk then allows us to configure the board, and we can start to see some of the more interesting features. All of the popular PC video modes at the time are supported, including VGA, which could display up to 256 colours. Our Amiga can't, or at least nobody found a way to do that until later in its life with some coding trickery, so that will bring the VGA palette down to 16 colours or less. It also says that it emulates popular sound cards of the time, Sound Blaster, AdLib, and of course the PC speaker. The Amiga's ports can be accessed by the emulator, and the mouse and joystick are also usable. Let's now jump into PC mode, and to do that we boot from the KCS disk, and in a flash, what looks like a regular IBM PC compatible is booting up. We then put the bootable MS-DOS disk in, and after entering a date and time, that's it. We're in MS-DOS. It's suddenly oddly familiar and yet simply odd all at the same time. Seeing MS-DOS on an Amiga just doesn't sit right at all with me. And what's the first thing I would have done with this had I bought it for my Amiga back in 1991? Well, I'd have loaded a game, of course. So let's start with something that shouldn't be too taxing, and that's Alley Cat. Ah yes, who could forget that theme tune piped out of the PC speaker, and those bright magenta CGA palette colours. This is a game from 1984 and it plays rather well on our Amiga, and so it should really. This was designed to run on Atari 8-bits and then later IBM PCs and the PC Junior, and in 84 they were clocked slower than our 11 MHz. At any point you can pause the emulation with Amiga and P keys, or you can drop into a settings screen like this, where we can turn things like the status bar off. That's the extra line of text at the bottom of the screen, but I kind of like that because it shows disk activity, and with a silent floppy emulator like the Gotek, it's nice to see if sectors are being read. Disk caching is also a nice feature. The current floppy will be cached to memory, so if you repeatedly access that floppy, it's much quicker to retrieve the data. Now let's get serious for a moment and load Wordperfect. It was also available on the Amiga, but here we're using the PC version, of course. It runs absolutely fine, and this is how I would envision a card like this really being used. For compatibility with some business software your boss says you need to use, but you don't want to give up your Amiga. Naturally, who would? Let's up the stakes now with some world-class leaderboard in different video modes. First up it's CGA, and I know you 80s PC owners have nostalgia for this, but come on, look at it. 50 Shades of Magenta is really not doing it for me. Despite those colours, this game actually runs okay. Just look at that shot, straight down the middle. And screen updates are about as quick as I'd expect on an IBM XT machine, if not a little quicker. It feels very much like the Amstrad PC 1640 which recently featured on the channel. If we step it up to EGA graphics though, well of course it looks prettier, but now we're taking a real frame rate hit. And 1990's LHX Attack Chopper is really pushing the card's limits. We're achieving one frame about every 4 seconds at times as our 3D helicopter is rendered on the game's intro screen. Don't get me wrong, I'm still impressed that it runs at all, but my flight simming would still have been taking place on the Amiga with this kind of performance. Aside from trying to run software that even a genuine IBM XT would have struggled with, I did have a few issues. Bruce Lee here was constantly registering an up press on the joystick, which rendered it completely unplayable. And when it came to sound, the PC speaker was fine, but I wasn't able to get the Sound Blaster emulation to kick in. Sound Blaster's own demo software refusing to play ball, although that was always quite specific about having genuine hardware anyway. While other software detected its presence but produced no sound, that could still be a driver or configuration error on my part, and I'll continue to explore that. And finally, VGA video was very hit and miss. Prince of Persia here, running in CGA mode, with our prince looking a healthy shade of purple, is quite smooth and playable. But in VGA mode, we only get black and white. And of course it took a performance hit, but oddly it was even slower in EGA, which is a halfway house between the two modes. You can see here it's really struggling along. So let's take it back to the office, and we're running PC Calc here to create some spreadsheets. And any application of this nature in text mode works absolutely fine. It's nice and readable on the screen, and it just does a great job with it.
That then is a flavour of what's possible with this card, at least without a hard drive, and there were so many other cards available and other options to achieve this with your Amiga. In fact, the Amigas had been designed with one eye on the PC market from day one. One example is Commodore's own bridge boards. Here's one. This was a 1992 model, which was Commodore's A2386SX, and that offered a 386 CPU at up to 25 MHz as well as a maths coprocessor. With it installed, you can then take advantage of the ISA expansion slots which are already in the Amiga 2000. And you could add a PC video or sound card to your Amiga to go alongside that bridge board and get the full PC experience. But you're really drifting into a price bracket now where you might as well just buy a PC, either to go alongside your Amiga or indeed to replace your Amiga. That's what a lot of us did. In 1993, I picked up a 486 PC. I think I spent something around £1,200 to £1,000 on that. And that's far cheaper than buying a big box Amiga and then all of those upgrades. Just made more sense. Our humble Power PC board then, it didn't blow us away, particularly in the gaming stakes, but if you wanted mid-80s IBM XT performance from your Amiga in 1991-92, well, I think you kind of got what you paid for. You did get £188 worth of PC from this card, and that was plenty powerful enough to serve those applications from the same era, mid-80s DOS-based applications like Lotus 123 and WordStar. For that, it was absolutely fine. But for gaming, I'll stick to my Amiga 500, thank you very much. I'm glad we had a chance to check it out, and should I come in possession of a hard drive for my Amiga, or indeed one of those bridge boards for the Amiga 2000, then we'll continue this journey of discovery into PC emulation on the Amiga. Until then, thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and take care.
If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.